Okay, so I initially did not want to talk about this, mostly because when I saw the article pop up in my Reddit feed, I was like, okay, cool, like, he's not really wrong for having an opinion like this. But then I looked at the comments of the Reddit post when this was posted onto our Canucks, and I was like, yeah, it's kind of weird, man. This is a weird thing to look at, and I'm not really too sure how comfortable I am. Now, after sitting down, reading the quotes, reading the article, and actually absorbing what Antoine Roussel is talking about here. So, our story goes as follows. Vancouver Canucks forward Antoine Roussel, whom has been somewhat of a topical discussion here on this YouTube channel. We talk about how his contract is not great, but the player himself is actually pretty okay. He may be overpaid, but he works hard and all that, and even though he isn't really the most skilled out there, it's certainly nice having that presence, at least, in our bottom six. But Antoine Roussel, who's a French guy, was broadcasted on TVA Sports in Quebec, which is primarily a French news outlet for sports and NHL stuff with a bigger focus on the Habs because, of course. And Roussel was featured on a little segment with TVA Sports. And on this segment, he ended up having a few quotes that were put up in this article over here, and because it's a short article, it only really has the quotes as its main bread and butter. We're just going to read these quotes over here from Antoine Roussel, a Vancouver Canucks forward, speaking on behalf of TVA Sports. For me, the league is going to stay in Canada. We're going to have a great Canadian league, and it's going to be super interesting. Obviously, he's referring to the Canadian division that was already set into stone, or at least set into tentative stone, I guess, yesterday, and then it was published in a video earlier today, so check that out if you haven't seen it yet. The players are excited. I was talking to Elias Pettersson this morning. He's looking forward to playing against Austin Matthews regularly, and against the Habs too. Now, it says Canadians here. This article is translated from French into English. I don't know if he's saying Canadians as in Canadians like the Habs, or Canadians as in the Canadian teams. So, Laine on the Jets, Gaudreau on the Flames, McDavid and Draisaitl on the Oilers. You know what I'm talking about here. Canadians, if you talk about the word Canadian in French, is actually spelled Canadien. So, that's kind of what it says here, translated from French into English. Roussel also had a surprising statement when he was asked to predict the rankings of this Canadian division. There's going to be a lot of competition. I believe the Habs will be the best team. It's going to be really tough with the Toronto Maple Leafs. As we say in French, it's going to get out of hand. After that, I think we'll be in the middle of the pack. And before we go forward, I want to stop things up right there because that's what we're talking about here. The Canadiens are going to be number one, and Vancouver is going to be in the middle of the pack. And it's a Vancouver Canucks guy who said this on Montreal-based media. So when I saw this initially pop up onto the Habs subreddit, a lot of Habs fans in the comments were like, huh, yeah, he's kind of right, you know? And for the most part, I was like, yeah, he's probably right too. If you've heard me say it a few times, my prediction for the winner of Canada is either going to be Toronto or Montreal. It's going to be one of the two, and then you have Edmonton, Winnipeg, Vancouver, Calgary, all thrusted in there. You don't really know the order. The only thing we do know is that Ottawa's going to be last. But I kind of did agree when Roussel said that Montreal would be number one. And then I read some of the other comments from the Canadian subreddit that were like, yeah, he's probably right, but like, it's kind of weird for a Vancouver Canucks guy to admit that, right? And then subsequently afterwards talk about, yeah, our team's probably going to be in the middle of the pack. Now, full clarification again, I don't think he's wrong. I think it's a very fair assessment. It's just if you go to the Vancouver Canucks subreddit, you'll see some comments talking about how Antoine Roussel is a guy who's supposed to be a locker room leadership kind of guy for the Vancouver Canucks. So how appropriate is it for a guy like that to go on to Montreal media and say, yeah, our team's not really going to be there, you know? Montreal, Toronto, they're better than us. We're just going to be in the middle of the pack. And again, it's not wrong, it's just weird. Right? Like, that's kind of why I was so conflicted as to whether or not I wanted to make a video about this in the first place, because he has the full right to go out there and say, yeah, obviously, you know, we're not as good as Toronto or whatever, so we're going to be in a position where we're inferior to them in the standings. But As a sports athlete who is playing for a hockey team out here, there's a little bit of a different flavor, I think, when it's a guy who is on the team itself talking about how his team is not all that good in terms of the standing projection compared to Montreal. And again, we have to take into account that this is on TVA Sports, so it is a Montreal-based outlet that focuses on the Montreal Canadiens. So obviously, when you have a guy who legitimately can speak French on there, you guys are going to talk some Habs, so it does make sense. But then we had ourselves a few other comments from Roussel talking about what exactly he feels the Vancouver Canucks are going to have to do. We have a lot to prove. We have young players who want to prove themselves again after having had an excellent playoff series. The article then talks about how Jacob Markstrom is out, and how Antoine Roussel shot at Braden Holtby for 2 practices, and he still hasn't scored a goal. Against Markstrom, I scored at least 1 or 2. So that Braden Holtby is darn good, I'll tell you. And so obviously there's some very positive stuff to go on with the Vancouver Canucks, and I think anybody, if you're taking a look at the Canucks, you probably can understand that the players on the team probably know the team a lot better than the fans, the media, and the people outside the organization. But I'm proposing this question over here in this video because it's just so weird, man. Like, do you think it's appropriate for a guy who is playing on the Vancouver Canucks to go out there and say, yeah, you know, we're not going to be all too great, especially compared to Montreal or Toronto? Again, he's not wrong. I honestly share that same belief. But it is kind of different and weird, so to speak, having heard that from a Vancouver Canuck himself, and particularly one who isn't really in the same authoritative state, I guess, as a Bo Horvat or an Elias Pettersson. The star power and the demand of respect from the fans isn't there in the same way, because Antoine Roussel doesn't score the points that Pettersson does. He doesn't lead like a Horvat does. He doesn't make the saves like a Markstrom used to, and he doesn't defend like Chris Tanev or Alex Adler do. Now, whether or not he was one of those guys changes the picture, that's a different question. But I want you to tell me in the comments below, do you think it's kind of weird? Because I do. I really, really do. And furthermore, I see a lot of Canucks fans that are kind of going about it and talking about how Roussel all of a sudden is kind of saying this in poor faith or whatever. And I can understand where they're coming from. I just don't really know where exactly I lie on it because, of course, you know, I've said it this whole time. He is a Canuck, and talking about the Canucks in a way like that certainly is going to rile up some Canucks fans because, let's face it, if a guy on the Nashville Predators or the Florida Panthers or the Arizona Coyotes said this about his team, like, the fans probably wouldn't care. The fact that it's Vancouver and Montreal getting involved in this discussion, as well as Toronto because he does name drop the Leafs as well, that makes this a big deal because these fan bases, I've said it a ton, were crazy. Vancouver Canucks fans are crazy for the Canucks. Habs fans are crazy for the Habs. Not in the same way that a lot of these American cities are crazy about their own hockey teams. And that's no discrimination or whatever. That's just kind of how it is. So talk to me in the comments about this weird Antoine Roussel interview talking about how the Habs and the Leafs are going to be great, how the Canucks are going to be mediocre or in the middle of the pack, as he said. But, you know, middle of the pack, mediocre, that's kind of the same thing, isn't it? By definition. Talk to me in the comments what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video. Wilson 99, and bye.